Hello, I'm Imogen Watson, reporter at The Drum, and welcome to the B2B World Fest, 2 days of macro thinking from B2B's brightest minds across the globe. And today we're going to be just talking about discussing the elimination of bias in the B2B sector. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Dion McIntosh, account manager at Stein IAS, Colette Phillip, managing director and founder of Brand by Me, and Sylvia Sybil, Vice President of B2B Client Solutions Marketing, Dell Technologies. So why don't we kick off? Why do you think why are we here, essentially? Why is this panel important? We'll start with you, Dion.
So just going back to the title of the actual discussion about eliminating bias in general, I think it's important to be having this conversation now because we're at a pivotal point in time where, companies and organizations are on the front foot of doing what they can to be more diverse and inclusive to various groups of people. So I think having this conversation at this point is really like a great position to be in.
I agree. And Colette, anything to add?
As Dion said, I think we're in a great position. I think specifically, often people can think about this topic in terms of B2C brands quite often and B2C organizations and think about it in terms of the rising pressure that brands face from consumers to sort of be leading by example and practicing what they preach. I think it's equally true for B2B brands. I don't think, first of all, there is that same sort of hard line between the two. And also, I think in the B2B space, potentially, we have even more space to influence and really drive change through our activities and through how we are internally, through the partners we work with, the way we treat our staff, the staff that we hire, recruit and retain. We have a lot of scope to do real good, create impact, and I guess show the world how it's done. And that's why, I'm really pleased to be on this panel.
Well, lovely to have you here. And Sylvia.
Yeah, I think that the conversation about inclusion and diversity has always been important, but absolutely this year or over the past years, it just bubbles up more and more. And I think people become more aware of it. For me, the thought about diversity and inclusion is really about the diversity of thought, right? Like we all have to have people that come from different backgrounds, have different experiences, different ideas. And I think that just makes our work much better. If we're only surrounding us with people that are like us, look like us, think like us, grew up like us, we're making advertising and marketing for people that are like us. And that is extremely limiting. So that's really why I'm really, really passionate about this. I love the diversity of thought and just keep an open mind, keep learning, keep trying to do things differently, and you will definitely get better results.
Now, 2020 was such an incisive year for the Black Lives Matter movement, and it kick-started a need for change. Can you each talk me through your experience of this year?
So for me personally, I found it quite difficult on two instances. Like an instance where you're obviously overcoming the challenges of go through a lockdown and coronavirus and kind of, uncertainty. And then because I personally live alone, I found it quite difficult navigating that side of what was going on in the world with the really graphic images and messages for all the activity from the George Floyd situation. And then also I felt like there was a period of time where there was a trigger of multiple instances where Black people were being murdered in the US. And because social media isn't necessarily censored, when you're scrolling through Facebook and Instagram, you're seeing these really graphic images and videos constantly. So for me personally, I found it really difficult to kind of see the positives in the light of all these like terrible situations. And then when you're obviously scrolling through comments, which I did stupidly quite a few times, just reading and seeing the ignorance of people, I found really like disheartening and like really difficult to navigate around as well. So that's what I found quite difficult.
For me, yeah, I mean, I echo what Dion said. I think there is something about, and we call it emotional labor, right? Because there's something, and there's a brilliant article that was written way back in, it might have been end of May or beginning of June, really around that same kind of horrendous weekend of May, which quite often this article calls the age of Black Death, because I'm with Dion, like you see images of Black people being murdered, and then you are then also on top of that, you know, in the middle of a pandemic where you're being told that and seeing, you know, firsthand that people of color are disproportionately affected by this pandemic, no matter where you are in the world, that's just the case. And then you are on a lower level experiencing racial injustice because that's just the way it is. You do, your families do, that's the kind of way it works. And you're also then reminded, because people are expecting you to show up and suddenly have meaningful conversations about race. And this may or may not be. So for me, in setting up my own business, I took the decision that I was really going to speak out around the diversity in the ad industry, because that's the industry I came from. I made a decision that I would sort of, you know, bring that into my work. And now I work with brands to help them build into racism into what they do. So it's part of my work. But even if it wasn't, for some people it isn't, this might be things that you only speak about with your family, you know, with your closest friends. And then you have, you know, colleagues or partners. The first thing they're asking you is, oh, what about this George Floyd thing? And without necessarily understanding the triggering impact of it or that. So that's where I started. And it was just exhausting, honestly. It was just exhausting. And I remember seeing this thing on Instagram. It was just this post saying, Black people are tired, don't ask for nothing. And I thought, when I saw it, I was like, that is just so true. I feel so tired. But even in releasing it and acknowledging it, I then suddenly felt really activated, because I was like, actually, this is a moment. This was both a movement and a moment. Like Black Lives Matter movement did not start in June, did not. It's been a movement for a while. That has been a thing. But there was and this is still a moment. And I thought, actually, there's a role here. One, because I run my own business. Brand by Me is my consultancy. I set it up, and that gives me some license here. You know, I'm not having to take the emotional labor of being asked to speak for an organization or develop the kind of, you know, race strategy without wanting to. It's my business. Of course I want to. It's part of what we do anyway. So there's that. There's also a sense of, and I think Sylvia highlighted it, this thing around kind of there is a responsibility that brands should and do have and can feel. And there's something around that. And I'm a brand strategist. That's what I do. And that's what I love. So there's something around that too. And I suddenly was activated to sort of go, actually, and in a way that, and also, Brand by Me, we work with brands that drive social impact anyway. So there was all these three things coming together, and for me personally, just going, how can I be a change maker? Obviously, while protecting myself, but how can I be a change maker here? Not leaping into suddenly being a diversity expert, because that's not what I do, but in using kind of my everything, professional networks, and what I do as a day job to really drive change, so we can build on this moment and just do what I can and my part. And that, I guess, that move from tired to activated, I've sort of been swinging between over this time, because as Dion said, we're also in a pandemic. So all of that, you go, yes, tired, activated. And I know I'm not alone in that. I think that's something. And I think there is something here about brands needing to understand and help people navigate that too. And I think that's a really important thing here.
Yeah,
that was long, sorry.
I was just going, wow. Very busy year for sure.
It's been a lot. Someone was like, pandemic, this, and then you're like, and then yeah, it's a lot. Everybody's on.
So water on the moon. It's just
exactly like that. There's so much happening this 2020. Right? Anyway, yeah, it's I think that's the case for everybody, and I think there again is something about brands really, where business to business brands understanding our role within this, but also where we need to acknowledge this and leave space, making sure that, we aren't going to occupy everyone's time because people have got a lot to deal with right now.
And Sylvia?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, as you said, Colette, Black Lives Matters is not a new movement, right? It was out there. We have been talking about it, but clearly when June came along, it just came so much more up the forefront. And obviously what happened is it got everybody emotionally, right? And Dion, I share your frustration about ignorance of people. Like that's really what got me, right? Now clearly, I have talked to people about it before, but it really encouraged me actually to ask more questions. And yes, ask more questions to other people. And I'm sorry, Colette, if that makes people tired. I'm pretty sure I did make some of them tired. But I did ask my closer friends of how they feel about it. And then, but also really asking myself, right? I do not consider myself to be, to see people differently because they are of different color, different backgrounds, different gender. But it gave me an opportunity to really question myself. And really, we had started, Adele, a lot of conversations. And I think, honestly, as you build your company culture, there's also a big opportunity. It's always voluntary to have these conversations, but we have a regular series that we call Let's Have a Conversation. And again, it obviously started with Black Lives Matters, but we have extended it to all kind of topics. And it's really nice to see that even then hundreds of people all of a sudden, they feel much closer connected. And that is something that gave me a little bit of hope, right? Most people don't want to be racists or have biases. Most people want to be good people. They just haven't thought about it a lot. And really just learning about, did I do something? Did I say something that I shouldn't say? And I'm going to give you an example. I do or did in the past say that I'm colorblind. And I am truly colorblind. I'm not using that anymore. I shouldn't be colorblind. I should see color, and I should acknowledge that there's color in the world, right? So these little things like that have definitely changed me with the whole Black Lives Matters this year. But I really also want to say, yes, it's horrible what happened, but I do also see the positive that we are talking more, that it has had an impact. Like you said, like all of a sudden it gives actually your cause a push, right? Or you don't have headwinds anymore. You're actually having tailwinds now, and that is a good thing too. And it happens all around the world, and that is the shocking part. So whatever we do as brands, we need to make sure that we connect the world again and think about it in the wide world.
Mm-hmm.
That's really interesting. Oh, sorry.
No, you go.
I was just going to say, during that period of time, I'm within Sinai, yes, I'm part of the EQ committee, which which encourages diversity and inclusion. But during this time, I've noticed an influx in people who I went to high school with, going back to the high school and noting a full list of their grievances, of their experiences. Mm-hmm. And I just thought it was a really good catalyst for change, because it identified the struggles that we had to kind of, suppress, because there's this camaraderie within the Black community where we feel open and we have the conversations internally between ourselves, and things are just common understandings for how things work. So it was just quite interesting to kind of broaden that conversation out and really kind of let people be known unapologetically about what we've experienced. Mm-hmm. Because I remember having a candid conversation with my friend a couple of years ago after she'd read Why I'm No Longer Talking About Race to White People. I think I've definitely got the book title wrong. And she raised some of the key elements that she read from that book to me. And I was like, yeah, that's just how it is. And she got physically, she was really upset about understanding that these are just common and day-to-day experiences that we face. So, but it's good. I feel like it's a definite positive moving forward, being able to be open about those conversations and not feeling as uncomfortable having those conversations.
And that's yeah, and I think I agree. And Sylvia, to come back to what you said, I think what gets tiring is where there is a way of asking the question that is tiring, and there is a way that isn't. And I think the example that you beautifully gave is an example of where that's not tiring, because you said there's a really important word you said is about asking myself the uncomfortable questions, right? And then sitting with that discomfort, and where we're in spaces, I'm with Dion in terms of where we're with spaces where that's happening. It is optimistic and energizing, and it's brilliant to see that evolving, and it's something, it is freeing to be able to have these conversations in a wider scope. Where it is not, where it does get exhausting is where you're having repeatedly the same conversations, or maybe there's some basic level stuff. I was on another panel for an event called Allyship in Action, and one of my fellow panelists said, you know what, on this, Google is your friend. I don't want to be telling you stuff that Google will tell you first. I'm more than happy to continue a conversation. And I loved that. I think there is something here. I think we say it quite a lot, and I know a number of people, we say you need to do the work, and that's everybody. That's me, that's you, that's everybody. We need to do the work, and there's a certain amount of work we need to do so that it doesn't become exhausting for everybody. And the really encouraging thing is that's whereas even at the beginning, maybe in June, it felt exhausting. Actually, there's been a real evolution there too. And the more I talk about this a lot in terms of the more that load is shared and the more this is picked up by brands, the less exhausting it comes, and the more we're able to activate change collectively, because actually the load is just shared, and there's a massive role for us collectively to play in doing that.
Yeah, I love what you said, like Google is your friend, right? Like, don't ask questions. There are a lot of things that you can educate yourself on, and you need to do that. I completely agree with you. One other thing that was really, liberating for me, obviously I'm scared of hurting somebody's feeling, like anybody is, right? So, but now all of a sudden I've got the feeling I can make a mistake because somebody actually will call me out on it, and then I can get better. The real fear that we probably all live with is that we make mistakes and we continue to make the same mistakes, right? Nobody wants to do that. So I feel that's a really good thing as well. People do call me out if I say something, and it's liberating. It's okay. So really a message we also need to give everybody.
I feel like you've just created a great advert for Google.
Yeah. Or any other search platform. Oh wait, there isn't any, so it has to be Google.
I guess this is an opportunity for Dion and Colette, for you guys to talk about, your journey as Black women into the B2B sector.
So when I just look back to like my entire journey, I say it's like long. I've only been in the industry for like 7 years. It makes it sound very dramatic. But when I think about my private education to begin with, and like navigating various pressures, because I'm from a Caribbean household and background. So my dad would always tell me that you have to work twice as hard as like your white counterparts in order to kind of be successful in life. And then there's like an added layer to that where he'd always be like, and even within the Black community, you have a responsibility to eradicate or like contribute to the changing of the Caribbean stereotype. Because what many people outside of like Black culture and the Black community is that Caribbeans tend to have like a negative like view on where they end up in terms of like careers and industries. So what he instilled in us was like really investing in education and really kind of like work twice as hard in order to kind of get to a successful, position. So when I just navigate through my high school experience and then through college, there's also this perception. I remember like a few years ago when I first started in the industry, my friend's dad was like, "Oh, Dion, like, where are you working? What do you do?" I was like, "Oh, I work in marketing." And he was like, "Oh, so you do the devil's work then?" Jokingly. So there's this whole perception that, it's not a legitimate industry. So on top of that, you kind of have to change the perception of what it's like to work within the industry as well. But what I thought was quite interesting is that within my high school experience, there was like a lot of pressure put onto working on more academic subjects. So like the physics, the Latin, the Greek, and that kind of stuff. And they felt that advertising, media, and like the arts was more of like a vocational subject. So it wasn't until college where I was able to kind of be immersed in that kind of more artsy and like more diverse in terms of people within my class as well. But then through university on my course, it was like just very apparent that with some of the modules that we kind of integrated with and mixed with, there was one course specifically called Culture and Communications, and there was a group. That course was like more of like a diverse background, and in preparing for this conversation, I look back and just to wonder like why was that group of people more diverse than the people in my course, because I did advertising media. And in looking back at that, I saw that they opened up the whole course information with a quote from an African American activist and poet, and they used language that was more specific and more open, that would kind of be more relatable to wider audiences. And then obviously we're in an industry that spent 50 to 60 years being predominantly white and male. So you can kind of see why, the shift is required because of like the years of it being predominantly based not in our favor kind of thing. But it's interesting though, because when I first started within the industry, I remember walking around my first agency and thought, oh, I'm like one of two people out of 200 people within this agency who are within the BAME community. So that within itself, I was wondering, I wonder how we managed to get to this point kind of thing. But I think it's really encouraging and really interesting to see like the steps that we are moving forward with in order to kind of drive more diversity into the industry. And I feel like it's really important for our faces to be seen in order for people to know that those spaces are available to them. And then that's really long-winded. So
again, I'm just there like, wow. Reflection is so powerful and so important. Colette, what's been your experience?
So I came to B2B world only when I set up Brand by Me. So historically, I worked I started, the first half of my career was in advertising, and then I worked for brand side, both at charities and then also for commercial brands, but always kind of B2C. So it was only in when I set up Brand by Me that I came back into a B2B world. And I will say that I'm very aware of my impact and position as a female founder and a Black female founder. I am very clear on making a specific effort not to code switch, so change kind of who I am when I show up into kind of boardrooms, but be really clear and authentic in myself, and also equip other people to do that too. I understand immediately because of, as Dion said, still in most spaces when it comes to agencies, Black people are the minority in leadership positions, and I'm very aware of the spaces I occupy as a founder and managing director of an agency, and I'm very clear on the influence I can have, which is significantly more than it was when I worked in-house or even B2C. There just is, and I said that in my in one of the other questions. I said there's an impact you can have because you can impact your clients, and you can lead by example, and you can equip people within your clients' teams. You can see the way that your teams are struggling, and specifically, I help businesses and organizations build brand strategies that drive social change, you can embed inclusion and these things into it. And I can embed that, and I made a very significant effort to make sure that I was going to be maybe a critical friend of our industry in that way, because my experience growing up in the industry was not pleasant, and it wasn't positive as a Black woman at all. I got held back and overlooked and all of that stuff. And the thing for me is that it was a decade since I worked in advertising. And again, I said it was B2C, but the agencies are very similar. And it was a decade. And so when I'm still hearing this, I do a lot of mentoring through an organization called Media for All. And we mentor people from Black and Asian and other minority ethnic backgrounds. And I'm still hearing similar scenarios and stories to what I heard when I grew up in advertising, which is now 15 years ago. And I've got to go, okay, this is unacceptable. But more importantly, I know that then I have an ability to change. And that's kind of, and the more, I guess, as the business has grown, we're 5 years old now, as the business has grown and our client base has kind of evolved, I'm always super clear about making sure that I step into my role as naturally and just as a Black woman. And I'm very clear on that. And actually, one of my clients said the really nice thing the other day. I won't name the client, but she said to me, and this was at the beginning, it was back in March, she went to me, I just love the way that you show up as your Black authentic self in your business. And I really understood that. And that's what I intended. I thought, yes, I now have an opportunity to be a real role model and to lead by example. And in my team as well, we are a very, there are now 4 of us in total, but we are a very diverse team. We work on inclusion. I partner with agencies. So I'm currently partnering, I'm doing an event on Thursday with the founder of a disability-led equity business. I make inclusion part of what I do because I have that remit to now, and that's really important to me because of my prior experiences.
Mm-hmm. And can I sorry, go ahead.
Yeah.
I could just comment on some of that. Like, I love what you said, Dion, about be seen, right? That is really, really critical. I mean, both Dion, Colette, you're successful women, right? And so, like, you showing other people that is absolutely possible, right? You can make it happen. Actually, here at Adele, we're looking at our hiring strategy. Which schools do we go to hire? We need to make sure that we actually go to the right schools, and then also show off that, we show up and we show that we care for that. Colette, you said you need to be clear. Like, every company should have a goal on diversity. And diversity is not just women, right? There needs to be a much wider measurement of diversity. So, like, we have got we call it our moonshot goal. So we have got a certain percentage of our employees and a certain percentage of our managers globally that we want to have as women, but that we want to have as Black community, that we want to have as Hispanic, Latinos. You need to be very clear what your goal is, so you know what you're working towards. And so I really encourage everybody, like, look at your companies, set realistic goals, and then find a plan how you go there, right? And again, showing up at the right places to hire, think about that actively. Where do you go to find talent?
Yeah, and I think it's also really important to kind of hone in on people when they're at a pivotal point where they're deciding what industry and what career to go in. So I feel like college and high school, those are like key areas where they're making decisions for higher education. And before I started within the industry, I didn't know that there were strategists, I didn't know that there were UX designers, I didn't know that there were all these roles that, were available. So I feel like it's really important to kind of know what is out there, what opportunities are available.
Yeah, I think I would add to that in terms of, I think it's really important, and often it's linked to what Sylvia said in terms of doing the work and hitting hard targets. It's also about being really, I talk about it as looking at your whole ecosystem. And there are 2 lenses for that. So there's one around, first of all, just to pick up what Sylvia said in terms of be intersectional in your thinking. So when I say intersectional, so what people do, and I actually hear this in my work a lot, with our diversity, to be honest, we've done a really good job on gender, but we are behind on race and disability, for example. And I'm like, okay, so what about your Black woman with a disability then? How are you doing for her? I don't think you're doing very well on this diversity if you're seeing these things, but people see it sequentially. Whereas in fact, if you take it and look for people at the intersections, and I'm doing this, is my intersectional, right? So for me, woman, black, intersection. That's my little thing for intersection. But if you look at for people at the intersection and you are intersectionally approach, it means that you don't just tick off one box and okay, we're done. And you don't just go for being blunt about it, the most privileged person within that group and the easiest to reach, because actually you're not doing anything to drive the diversity of thought that Sylvia said so important. And I guess the other part of looking at your ecosystem is that, I mean, even just taking something like your people, recruitment is really key, looking for people, of course, but then it's also about what are you going to do, how are you going to retain the people when they're in, what are you going to do to help people rise up, because actually some industries don't have an issue getting people through the door, but actually progression is really difficult, so people bounce out. We see a lot within specifically, I guess this is true in advertising specifically, people are bouncing out at middle management stage because there's nowhere. So you're seeing a lot of attrition, and there was an IPA survey that showed that quite specifically, that people are just bouncing out. So you have to look at these things as well, and that's why I said look at your entire ecosystem, look at recruitment, look at your retention, look at your culture, all the stuff that Sylvia was saying that they're doing. That's what we really need to do, and then it will start. I guess some of the stories that Dion and I have just shared, that's then going to change things, because I will say again, I work to be a critical friend to the industry. I do a lot of industry events, and I talk about this a lot because I still think, I said, I'm going not good enough. If I'm still hearing people of colour having the same experiences in 2020 that I was having in 2002, I'm going to say this got an issue, because you've been saying diversity is really important for the whole time, and not enough has moved. And now we've all talked about it. There's an exciting kind of moment here. We shouldn't need this moment to act as a catalyst, but now we've got it. Let's make that part of it.
And to lead on from there, that was kind of my next question, which is, in the aftermath of the protests, brands and agencies came out and they were pledged to do better for their employees and to make the workplace more inclusive. 5 months down the line, have you guys seen any tangible changes that sort of happened since that point?
Yeah, I know that, I think it was Adweek, had released a report to various agencies to understand the pay difference between white counterparts and black people and people of ethnic minority background, and then also saw that they had requested information around what the weight is of the diversity within the organizations. But the last that I checked, that they're struggling to get those figures from agencies. Mm-hmm. So I think within itself, I feel like people are aware that they need to get these things done, because what they hadn't experienced is that there's this extra level of accountability. Because, as Sylvia and Colette had mentioned previously, Black Lives Matter isn't new. And I think there was this period of time where it wasn't on the forefront of people's minds. And within that window, they let certain things slip, which now at this point, people like old employees are now being vocal about their experiences. And so I feel like companies and businesses are now acknowledging that they have a level of duty in order to be more like a diverse business altogether.
Mm-hmm.
For me, I think that there have been a number of statements made early, and I think there's a difference between, so there are some, and I looked at this, so I reviewed, in fact, there was a really brilliant guide done by a consultant I know called Black Lives Matter for Marketeers, and they'd kind of reviewed different statements and that people have made. And I think there's a difference between where people have made statements like really vague, we are very committed to diversity, and just reiterated stuff they'd already done with nothing behind it. Mm-hmm. Unsurprisingly, those companies and brands have done nothing. There's been no change because the initial statement was wishy-washy, it was performative, it was rushed, and it was done as a reaction. Mm-hmm. Where we've seen movement has been either, I think there are some brands that have got a really good legacy in this anyway. So, I mean, I'll caveat this, but I don't work there. But I think Adobe do really great work around diversity and inclusion. Genuinely, I've seen from afar, I can see the work they're doing, the way they involve their employee groups. I think they do great work. And unsurprisingly, when this happened, they will still continue to do that work, holding up their hands and saying, you know, we've got a long way to go. There's some learning we have to do, but that sort of thing. Where we're seeing honesty in those statements, where we're seeing tangible commitments from brands. So some brands publish like 5-step plans. Here's what we're going to do. Sylvia talked about at Dell, they have hard, fast targets where we're seeing this action. Clearly, you're then seeing action and momentum, because actually when you have hard data, when you've made very firm commitments and when you've made those public, it is driving kind of kind of momentum behind this. The other thing I've been really encouraged by, so there has been some empty action and some empty statements. Mm-hmm. There's definitely been some movement. I guess the thing around, so I saw it quite specifically with the Adland Commits letter that was done by Creative Equals, is like Dion said, in that letter, people made some commitments. And then one of the trade publications went back and said, what are people doing? And some people didn't have the data, didn't bother reporting back. But where people did, it gave their employees, so it gave two things very well. It gave their employees an opportunity to call out their organizations within, as in, why have we not reported on this? Or even, this is what we've been saying for ages, particularly where organizations have employee groups. That was what it gave them, an opportunity to do that, because they're like, look at what other agents are doing. We should be doing this too, or what other brands are doing. But the second thing was, where people were starting to make steps, it gave them the ability to talk about it and say, actually, here's what we're doing. We haven't done everything, but here's where we are. And those brands that started talking about the steps they've done against these measures started to cut through and stand out. And it's as simple as this, because we can see who's doing it and who isn't. Mm-hmm. And then, whether it's businesses or customers, or whether it's as employees and potential employees, people are able to make choices about the kind of organization. So, and that's where I think the tangible changes, where they haven't been enough for me, but where they have been, it has driven a wider change than just within the organization. And I think that's the brilliant thing, which is where I encourage, wherever you are on the journey, whatever you're doing, I encourage organizations and companies to be very clear, have those hard measures that Sylvia talked about, and then show where you are against it and report on time, because in doing so, it pulls other people up who aren't doing it, but it also, you'll be surprised, it also accelerates your progress at the same time. So for me, I'm like, not good enough for progress, but actually there is some hope.
Mm-hmm. There's so much that I would just repeat, Colette. So I agree with you. Like, it starts with hard targets. Like, set yourself a target. Like at Dell, we had these targets before. It didn't start in June. But as you also said, Colette, like now we actually have, people are more open to hear about these targets, right? And how we're doing against them. So every organization needs to have targets. If you have wishy-washy goals, you're going to be wishy-washy gone. So you need to do that, right? Now, what I have seen is, I do like that there's more conversation about this. Like 5 years ago, would we have had this panel? Probably not. We would have talked about women versus guys, right? But now this is actually a much better conversation. So I do see a lot of positives in that. You mentioned employee resource groups. Really important. Whoever has it, if you work at a company where they exist, join. You will be so much happier, because you have a connection with people that have that care for the same things that you care for. So definitely join these things. I mentioned before, we have these regular conversations. I feel much more connected to my colleagues because of these conversations. Mm-hmm. I met so many new people that, I don't work with every day, but because we were in these groups together where we had the conversations, I know so much more about them. I actually now can reach out to them for things that probably have nothing to do with the topic, but they're becoming my new network, right? So really just get involved. We cannot say it often enough. You need hard targets, and everybody please get involved. And then we will see some improvements. It's not going to happen overnight. I really don't think so. And, we need to continue to have this conversation. We're never done with this topic, but at least we will always go forward if we continue to have the conversations.
Mm. And as you say, like a lot of change comes from the employees. So, what role should they be playing in making their workplace more inclusive? What words of advice would you share for employees who want to call it out, but yet they might be scared of, going against their superiors?
I feel like it's just important to just be bold and be brave with it. Because, one of the key things that has come out of like the Black Lives Matter movement is, the fact that people need to be open and they need to educate themselves on like the etiquette of like how to like behave in all situations and circumstances as well. And I feel like it's just a really important conversation to be had. And as long as they approach it in a way that is conducive to change within the organization, I feel like they should just be like bold with it. That's my opinion.
I really like be bold. I absolutely agree. I think there is something. So I think there's two things. I've talked about intersectionality a lot, and I think really tapping into that and creating, thank you, creating those groups, intersectional support groups. So you might have employee resource groups that focus on one thing, and that's cool because actually there isn't a role for that, but actually understanding how you can come together and how you can support each other is really important. Building on that theme, I think allyship is everything for me. And I think as the role, how employees can really support and drive change within an organization is by being allies. And no matter what element of inclusion you're talking about, that's true. So, where we need our white colleagues to step up when it's about matters of race, we need our people with, who are able-bodied or even with hidden disabilities step up for our colleagues with disabilities, very visual ones. This is what we need to be doing. We need to be allies. And I think organizations, so I think encouraging allyship, I think, even if your organization is doing nothing, as Sylvia said, get involved in your groups. If there aren't a group, create them. If there isn't a group, create it. Even if it's informal, you don't need to have a formal name and stuff. Just create a group of like-minded people and really focus on being that brilliant ally, so that people, so that everyone is calling this stuff out. So I'll give you an example. I saw this on Twitter. Somebody on Twitter posted a story where they'd been at some diversity training and the trainer had used a racial slur inadvertently. Now, the person on Twitter who had posted this was a white person, and they posted their discomfort with this, but they'd also sort of said how uncomfortable they felt. And then my question was, well, did you speak up? And the person was like, no, I felt far too uncomfortable. It wasn't a safe space. And here's the thing for me. So let's not get safe spaces twisted. The idea of safe space is for people from marginalized groups or underrepresented groups or, colleagues of color, if we're talking about race, to have a safe space so that they can be open about their challenges, so you can vocalize it without fear of retribution, without fear of judgment, and so that you can feel safe to express and share your lived experiences. If you don't have lived experience of that issue, what you need to see this as is brave space. It's not safety for you. Some people are interpreting that as comfort. That's not the case. This needs to be brave space. So brave space for this lady would be speaking up because you are white and you're not. It's not the same as the person who, imagine the racial slur was in an indirect, indirectly aimed at. Of course, this trainer wasn't calling them racial slur. They'd used it to refer to a group of people. But that being said, imagine how that felt from someone from that group. You aren't from that group, step up and say it. And that brave space is really, really important for me. So I guess this notion of allyship and being, as Sylvia also said, individuals need to do the work. But I think that within companies, we can do that too and create this shared space for learning. And that comes as part of it for me. And that's how I think employees can really drive change, is by coming together.
Yeah, completely agree with you on that. I do think leadership has the responsibility to set the tone, right? Brave spaces are great, but set the brave space. Where do you feel like you can be brave enough about that, right? So that leadership has that responsibility. But you know what? Leadership will not solve all problems. So absolutely, employees need to step up. Employees need to get involved. There's nobody going to be that solves it for you, right? So everybody needs to get involved. We're talking a lot about allyship, and I think that's a great term, right? You have to be an ally. across the board, right? And find the thing that you're really passionate about, but be kind, be an ally, help others. So yeah, absolutely. Employees need to speak up. Leadership needs to create a space for it.
Mm. And we've touched on obviously the Creative Equals letter, and in June the UN and the WFA, they established a series of measures that were designed to hold brands to account when it comes to the diversity of their workforce. You know, to what extent can these measures, you know, on holding brands to extent, what extent can they really have?
Something that my dad has also said to me was like, he sees that what these brands are doing and he sees through it. And like, I think it's really important that these brands have like diverse groups of people encouraging, like being involved in those conversations before they're then released and made public and out there, because in having that diverse set of people in the room, it then gives them the opportunity to say, that's not going to be realistic. That's not going to really fly with like various groups of people. But equally, to a positive point, I think it's a good thing that it's been acknowledged as something that needs to be done in general. But I think how it's then executed is really quite delicate, and it needs to have the right people in the conversations for it to be purposeful.
Yeah, and that's why I liked, I guess, the measures. Interestingly, so the UN and WFA established a series of measures. I could see the letters from the respective ones. I'm not sure I was clear on what the measures were, but that's cool. Even though it was widely reported, I'm still none the wiser on what the measures were. Whereas at least the Creative Equals, I didn't think it went far enough to Dion's point, but I do think it was a really tangible set of measures regardless. But I guess no matter where the measures come from, once there are clear things that you need to do, it's down to people then to do them. Making sure, and these measures, can they hold brands and agencies to account? Not alone, but if brands are using them, and if they are robust, and if brands are using them and then publicizing what they're doing and talking about what they're doing around them, and as we said, making sure that things are meaningfully done, so not just ticking boxes. So I do have a little bit of an issue with the focus on diversity for diversity's sake and representation. What I mean by that is not necessarily from the same view as your creative director, Dion, not from the same view, because I not from that point of view, but I do feel quite strongly with the point you made, which is that in front of the camera, if there isn't pure inclusion and representation across the board, actually what you've got is just tokenism, and it won't be authentic and meaningful. And that's where it jars, because ultimately where we see beauty, where we see this done well, everyone sees it, it just chimes, it seems like something good. If we see it done badly, not by the people of those communities, not engaging them at all, we can see through it. And I guess where measures help is if those measures are comprehensive enough that they go beyond just a tick box diversity and representation, and talk about things like behind the camera and inclusion and engagement with communities and that sort of thing. And also, having measures and talking about and maybe also publicizing your progress, which I think that was one element of the UN and WFA measures that I loved, was like they were really clear. Talk about what you're doing publicly and publicize your progress. I love that. If that was a measure alone in there that people did, I think it will drive change, because as long as people start to adopt it, and then as long as we, in the industry also hold people accountable for doing so we can use these as criteria too. If these measures are good, I, as an agency, can say, well, I don't want to work with my clients unless we're going to both work on to these measures. I can do that sort of thing. Employees can go, actually, are we doing these? No, I can see we're not doing measure number 4. Why are we not doing it? Or whatever it is. It's a starting place for the discussion, and it's a sort of line in the sand that you can draw that everybody can sort of at least reach a minimum. I don't think it's the be all and end all. And obviously, if you publish measures, no one does anything with them. That's meaningless. And then again, I think there's also then a role in terms of this accountability for industry publications like this and platforms, because actually that gives you these measures give you kind of an objective lens by which you can actually move the conversation forward and hold brands and agencies alike accountable for too. So you can actually use that as well. And I think that if they are embedded into industry level industry level action, then I think, of course, they can kickstart change. They can't do it alone, but at least it gives everybody a starting place.
Completely agree. It's one thing really followed up with, where it's like, when they come out and you say, obviously with the UN and the WFA, it felt sort of a news story, and then it kind of went away a bit. But it's one thing that we're trying to do is just, catch up in a couple of months' time and be like, well, what have you done? So it's important to hold it to account. And
I heard about it. I heard about it via I was watching a panel discussion and someone mentioned it, and I hadn't heard anything about it. Not to say that why would I have done necessarily, it may have not been in, but even the fact that on that panel discussion that was on an unrelated topic, it wasn't a diversity panel, for example, they had talked about it as an example of good practice and driving change. And I thought, actually, yes, this is good, because at least it is driving some sort of conversation and it's getting people to think about this stuff. And I'm all for consistent measures, as I said, because rather than everybody going off doing their own thing, and people will start with the lowest common denominator and the least thing to do. Many people, not Dell, of course, but others will start with the lowest common denominator stuff, and start with the basics and then abandon it altogether. So those measures just help people all start from somewhere that at least is going to do something.
Yeah, like I think progress reports are really important, right? Like we are publishing a progress report every year, and that is really critical. So you as a company actually believe in it, but your employees also believe in it, and they can say, yeah, we did it. Like, I'm proud to work here. So it's really important. Yes, there are third-party measurements that we are talking about here. They're a good baseline. I don't think they really mean anything until the companies that take them on truly believe in them. If you're only doing it so next time you're not called out as the bad guy, you're not doing the right thing. And I don't think you're ever actually getting anywhere. You're just making a tick box. So really important. These are great baselines. They give you good ideas, but you as a company, you have to sit down and really say, what are my goals? What are my measurements? And how do I report against that? Otherwise, I really think if you don't get the buy-in from your employees, from everybody, management, employees, everybody, you're not going anywhere. You're just trying to avoid bad press. And that's not the right thing to do anything. So,
and that gets swung through, doesn't it? Like, if you're just trying to avoid the bad press, immediately everybody sees through, and you will get the bad press because immediately people see through, and then you also become a target. And rightfully so, you become a target because you're a very easy target for people to go back to you whenever there's something happening and go, what are you doing? Oh, actually nothing. Remember that. It's that.
I just talked about it. I really think companies have to understand we're not just doing it for doing it. There is actually also a huge business benefit into it, right? So, and you want to attract a wide variety of clients. So yes, please show them. So and employ them, because then you develop the right products. Like, really, you need to believe in there is a benefit for you as a company in it. Well, clearly, yes, there is. I strongly believe in that. But just measurements on their own are just measurements, especially when they come from a third party.
For sure. And I am conscious of time. I mean, we could talk about this for hours, so sort of towards the end. But I guess really the crucial question is, why do you think that there is this need to increase diversity in the B2B sector, and perhaps evolve perhaps more on the point you just put up, which is there are business incentives to it?
Yeah, just to kind of reiterate the points that Colette and Sylvia both made, it's just really important to ensure that people feel included within conversations and with like how the industry moves forward as a whole, and then also in doing so and inviting more people to the conversation, you're able to kind of grow and diversify your offerings as well, which, to Sylvia's point, it's beneficial to everyone at that point.
Yeah, I would agree. I think often, and I think it's baffling, like I can see from both Sylvia and Dion, it's baffling to us why people don't understand the business benefits of this. And I think it is ironically because maybe their networks and their lens is not diverse enough, so they can't see it. There might be something in that. But yeah, I you can't stress enough that the business benefit is there. I think more importantly, I think it's important that we don't see this as an act of service or benevolence. This is not something good you're doing for underrepresented communities. It's something because actually we have a world and everybody deserves to be included and participate in that. And we should not be putting up barriers. And because the reason why there are barriers are because of historical aberrations that we now must address. And there is a ticking time bomb because of the business benefits are there, and people are realizing there is a ticking time bomb for businesses that maybe are slow to do this. And specifically, I stand by what I said for the B2B space. I think we have huge impact because we're the sector behind the consumer brands even, right? So we have even more of a pull. We have the spend, we have the vehicles. We are the engine that keeps the brands and businesses and organizations going. And I think there's something in that. And I really have understood that. Even just thinking about my consultancy, I've really understood the power that you have as a B2B organization to really drive change, because you're not just going directly to one audience, you're going through any number of them, and the amount and the footprint that your clients have and they touch, that's your impact too. And that's why this conversation is really important for B2B brands. Yes, there is a business benefit in it. And if you haven't understood that, you are just going to lose out. But most importantly, it is now just something that we need to do, and we need to stop procrastinating around it and start doing the hard, the work, the uncomfortable work, setting the targets and just getting on with it now. That's it. There can be no more conversation around. No, of course, there can be lots of great conversation, but now we have to be in action mode.
Mm-hmm. And the only thing I have to add to that one, just personally, it's going to be a more interesting world, right? If we are talking to each other, if we are trying to learn about other things, about other people, this world is just going to be so much more interesting. And yes, absolutely, I love it to say, like, if you don't get onto this bandwagon right now, you're actually going to be left behind, because there are business incentives for that. But again, just personally, I just feel it's going to be a better and more interesting world. And why wouldn't we want that?
And I guess let's just end on each of you giving one piece of advice to any company working in the B2B sector that wants to do better, and to make their workplace more inclusive and to make their company more diverse.
I think it's important if you do have people of diverse background within your organisation, to have conversations with them and be candid. Allow them to feel comfortable answering the questions that you would otherwise feel really, awkward or uncomfortable asking. And then on the back of that, I think it's just very important for people's faces to be seen. And then for me personally, when I see people of diverse backgrounds on calls, because obviously everything's now through Zoom, and when people turn their camera on and it's diverse faces, I automatically feel really encouraged and really motivated to do a great job and everything like that. And in having that diversity there's so many mental benefits to the wider group. There's so many just diverse in thought and just in general, there's so many benefits in it that businesses should really just kind of have those conversations with their employees, but then also try to understand those various communities to know what kind of drives them to buy if you're trying to increase sales for certain markets, or what motivates them to apply for a specific job as well. I think it's really important to understand the cultural nuances of people in general to encourage them to join.
For me, I think there are, I'm going to say, you said one, I'm going to give two because they're linked. Yeah. The first one is to build inclusion, build inclusion into your brand. build inclusion into your brand. So no, don't just see it as a diversity and inclusion tick box, like a silo, but build it into everything you do, from your partnerships to your processes to your purpose. Like, understand how it helps you deliver your purpose. Understand how this is baked in, and set it as one of your values. Just build it into everything you do. And then link to that, as a business, see yourself as an ally, and then understand what that means for you. Position yourself as an ally as a business, and understand therefore what's the impact you can have. So, we all read the documents about allies being individuals, but I think if you can think of yourself as a business, as an organization, as an ally too within this cause, then it will help you understand maybe what you need to prioritize and do. And like Dion said, listen.
Yeah. For me, it's like a 4-step plan. Like, first of all, sit down and be honest with yourself where you're standing right now. Don't judge yourself. Be honest where you are right now so you don't make excuses for that. The second thing is, we talked about it before, put targets in place. Where do you want to be? And don't think in 3 months. Think about where do you really want to be in a few years. The third one is do an action plan. Conversations are part of action plans. Hiring are part of action plans. How you do advertising is action plans. How do you build a culture of inclusion in your company? All of these parts are action plans. Truly make an action plan out of it, not just statements. And then the fourth action is look at it on a regular basis. Again, it's probably not a monthly basis, but look at it at least on a yearly basis. And again, be honest with yourself. Where have you made progress? Where haven't you made progress? Where do you need to change your actions?
Perfect. Well, unfortunately, that is all we have time for, but it's been an absolute pleasure hosting you all today. For those of you joining us at home, if you're still hungry for some B2B World Fest content, check it at www.thedrum.com/B2B.